want all of you to visualize a story, something that you remember. It could either be a story you heard when you were a kid, a great book, childhood memory. It could be a Snapchat story. That's fine. It could also be a great novel. But I want you to keep that in the back of your head as we go through this presentation today. I remember when I went to college, I was promised that you are going to go to college and you're going to get a great degree, and that means that you're going to get a job. And what we've learned in this postmodern era is that, unfortunately, it takes a lot more than having a college degree. It takes having a fantastic piece of paper that is supposed to say who you are, what your career strengths are going to be, and why you'd be a good employer or employee. It's this little piece of paper, a resume. It's a daunting task. And I know some of you might be thinking, what does this 22-year-old know about resumes? Well, in the course of my time at Stevenson and the course of when I've been a student employee or through my internships, I've had a total of 10 jobs in 3 years. I have gotten the privilege and the honor of sitting in on job resumes, of hearing about what employers want, and also working with my friends. And I remember when I sat down to write my resume, this was what I kept thinking. What is it, right? How's the layout supposed to look like? Everyone has a different idea of these set of rules. Should I put my address on it? What's going to be actually on it? Can you please explain it to me? And I found that throughout the time that I've been working on my resume or helping other people with theirs, the only rule I can really tell you that works and is what you need to remember when you go home today is to be authentic. That's a daunting word, authenticity or authentic. What does it actually mean? Because for everyone here, what's so cool is that it's a different story for all of you. And the most important narrative you're probably going to leave from college with is this little piece of paper, your resume. And it's a 3-step process that we're going to go through on how to achieve authenticity in resumes. It's to know your story, right? Know who you are, know what you're going to talk about. Realizing that style, unfortunately, does speak a little bit higher than maybe it should. And the third, and the hardest, unfortunately, is owning it. Making sure that you know who you are and that you're capable of going out and being okay with it. So the first, the easiest one, right? Knowing your story. It seems like it would be a simple answer, but what we know about the way that humans remember facts and the way that we all process information is that a story or a narrative is more memorable than fact, meaning that the way that you pronounce a fact or what you memorize things for classes, whether it's that story I mentioned earlier, you remember it because it was told to you in a meaningful way. It was told to you in a way that made sense. And what we know about memorization, these 3 words up here, if I were to ask you to please memorize these 3 words when you leave here today, most of you might be able to, probably half the room, right? Harry Potter, horse, and table. But let's say that these are going on your resume. I know they wouldn't, but practical. I love Harry Potter, I love horses, and I like to draw on tables. So that's why we picked those words. Instead of just listing them, make them have context. That's the most important thing you can do. It needs to have context in order to tell a story. So instead of just trying to remember Harry Potter, horse, table, make it a story. Harry Potter drew a horse on the table is something that you'll be able to remember and take away from. And when we think about a resume, that's essential. When I was 18, I took a writing class. It was actually songwriting, and it has stuck with me ever since. And it's the idea that instead of just being very broad, you should be specific. Mr. Bishop would say this to me all the time, and it's the more specific you are, the more memorable and relatable it actually is. And I think often, unfortunately, we think the opposite. We think broad terms and forms of writing are going to be more memorable. Broad terms and form of speaking, thinking about your hashtags and things that we use, they're very broad term. But when you make it relatable and make it super specific, people actually remember more. And I always talk about the Beatles as one of my favorite and inspirational music groups growing up. Their lyrics really speak well. So I don't know how many of you know a guy named Jude. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But it's still specific. It's a very specific lyric in this song, but somehow, some way, all of us find a way to relate ourselves into it. Not all of us are in a band, not all of us are singing, not all of us are performing, but those lyrics and why they're memorable are because they're specific. They paint a picture. They don't just tell you, they show you. So, when we talk about resumes specifically, because that's what I'm here to talk about, this is actually from a student that I helped with a resume. So she went away to New Orleans and worked on a home rebuilding project. And she had this up on her resume, and it was very minimal, but it's still specific, but it's still a little bit broad, because what's this missing is context. So instead of saying managed a team of students to rebuild homes, you can say coordinated 20 students to complete 15% of a home rebuild project over the course of 1 week. A little bit more powerful because you can visualize it. You see exactly what that context is, and that is what puts you way ahead of those 5-second resume clips. So, not everyone obviously has as much experience or has gone on a home rebuild project, but that doesn't mean that you can't have context. Now, the second little piece of this process of authenticity, the first was know your story. And now second, we're going to talk about style. And I'm talking about style in terms of layout, but also in terms of your personal style. So another theater, I was a theater nerd growing up, loved theater. And my professor at the time, when I was 18, had each of our theater students walk into the room and sit down silently on a chair. And the idea was we were supposed to gather who that person was just based on how they walked into the room. I will never forget that because it was the most memorable experience of how who you are when the second you walk into a room is not just more valuable, but it's what people remember most. And the same goes with your resume because yes, you might have great content, but if it doesn't look good, doesn't sound good, then people are not going to read it. So what does it say about who you are as terms of layout? I'm a really big proponent. I don't agree with the rule that a good resume has to be super colorful and energetic, because if you're not an energetic, colorful person, then why is your resume looking like that? It shouldn't. If you're analytical, that's okay. It doesn't have to be full of color in order to be meaningful. If you're someone who does not like to have it that way, don't put it on there. It's okay. Think about in terms of style when you're online through the various streams of content that come at us all the time. The people that you probably most relate to on, if it's Snapchat and Instagram, is that layout. The way that it looks from the second that you go onto that page, that's what's most memorable to you and meaningful. So this is an example of a resume that is a little bit different, which is why I picked it as an example. So the number one thing that I always tend to talk about is that these rules break a lot of things that are told about resumes. It's not supposed to be flipped, right? It's always supposed to be straightforward. This kind of makes the employer have to kind of tilt their head if they were going through a bunch of them, which is a great thing because it makes them take a second look at your resume. But also, the way that she has her name played out makes her experience more valuable than her education, because that's where your eye goes first. And what's so valuable about that is that every one of us has a different way of how organizations should be based on your experience, your education, your skills, and what's more meaningful to you. And that's what's most important. There's always been this saying that education should be the first thing on your resume. I don't agree with that, because if you have more experience or more valuable experience than you think, not to say that education's not valuable, because it is, thank you, Stevenson, but what's most valuable, it could be your experience, or it could be your skills. And when we look at my resume, I have it laid out in a very specific, meaningful way to me. I do use color. I use purple because I want it to say that I am a confident person. I use lowercase letters on purpose because I want it to have a different look to it. Those are very valuable, meaningful choices for everything I'm doing. The reason that the Y goes into skills is because I want you to notice that first and then make your way down. And just to show a little bit closer of an example, when we talk about experience, not everyone's going to have a whole row of experience, and that's completely okay. I've been lucky enough to have that. But if you don't have that, put your education first, or find ways to make your experience have context. So now, thirdly, and probably the hardest, and that is, let's say you've done that. You've gone through your resume, you have your layout, and you have the thing that speaks to you most. You have your story. But now you have the hard task of taking that and putting it out there to employers and hearing no often, or hearing yes, hopefully. But still, you still have to take it and make it yourself and make it who you are and be okay with it. If it is you on a page, then it's authentic. If it's you at a meeting and you feel confident in who you are, then it's authentic. The hardest lesson I think I ever had was when I was 19. I was an IT consultant, and I had an employer yell at me. First time it had ever happened, and he told me that I was incompetent at my job and that I had no business being a consultant at this company. I cried. I really cried. And what was shocking to me most, though, is that everyone at that company that I went to, whether it was HR, whether it was to my coworkers, to my managers, is that their reaction was kind of like, get over it. It happens. People are going to yell at you. And while I disagree with that somewhat, because I don't think it's ever reasonable for a vice president to yell at you, owning it means, yes, they yelled at me, but I know I did the right thing, that it's my job, that I handled it correctly. So when I think about my resume, and I've been told multiple times that the way I have it laid out is wrong, that the way that I speak about it is incorrect. But it's worked for me. It's gotten me the job. It's gotten me the interview. And that's what's most important. So when you leave here today, I want all of you to think about your story. Whether you've worked 5 jobs, whether you are graduating from college, whether you're just starting out as a freshman, the idea is to be fearless with it. Because who you are is what's most important on a page. That's what's going to stand you out from everyone else in the competition. So what I want to leave you with is be fearlessly authentic. Thank you.